Alright, back doing another set. 2 levels this time. Well, 1 and a boss. You know how much shorter the boss levels usually are. And I've got acrylic forest this time, which really, to me, doesn't look like much of a forest. I mean, those really aren't trees. And I mean, what sort of tree has a revolving spiked door placed in the trunk? Although there are lots of angry flowers spewing smaller, depressed-looking flowers. And the really, really depressed-looking flowers. Pain in the ass level, this one. And just... yeah, horrible, horrible level to play. And fun the first time through, but when you're actually going through it properly, trying to make sure you've got everything done right and all that crap, it is just really annoying. Almost like a Christmassy theme there with the little board-looking things in there, red and green, almost candy cane style stripes going up to them. But you know, that's all secondary to the fact we're here to kill fleas. Those poor, poor bastards. I think we've actually maxed out the life meter by this point. I don't actually know if it goes beyond, if it actually rolls over beyond 9 and just stops showing it, or if it does have a hard cap of 9. Don't think it really matters much though. Because that's the other disadvantage of recording, you know, basically on a single run, or as much of a single run through as you can. You don't get any of the really massive funny stuff ups, but you get to watch me fuck around trying to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do. In a level where the greatest threat being thrown at you is what appears to be a congealed bunch of pollen, which is really not that impressive a threat when you think about it. I mean, it's pollen. You know, unless Plok's some sort of, you know, or is somehow suffering the worst case of hay fever seen in this continent, there's just really not a lot to it. That's the little trick of the game. You can actually make those jumps. You're supposed to, I believe, use the lanterns to stand on and leap up. So basically, you're traversing all over the same few areas in slightly different elevations to kill all the fleas, while dodging angry flowers throwing angry pollen at you. Which, if it doesn't, you know, sound like, you know, the game pitch for, you know, for a 1980s, you know, let's make this while on a drug-fueled bender sort of game, you know, not much will. I actually noticed the group behind this did a lot of licensed games and not that many originals. Most of the originals they did come out looking something like this in terms of just how out there they are. I think it's a reaction to the sheer amount of drugs needed to live down being involved with the Cutthroat Island game. And you know, every other licensed game they've been involved with. Because there's a generation of gamers worldwide that still have the, you know, the equivalent of Vietnam flashbacks when people mention the minecart level of Cutthroat Island. You know, for all 20 of you out there that were masochistic enough to play it even after knowing about the reviews, you know, if the fact that it was a licensed game wasn't enough to tick you off beforehand, you're either really dedicated, really stupid, or just hate yourself. And I'm willing to bet most hardcore gamers are in fact all three. You know, present company included. Yeah, so quite a bit of backtracking. Not a lot of... The area itself doesn't... Sorry, the level itself doesn't cover a massive amount of area. But the constant need to go through each one at a different height, you know. It ends up being about 5 times the level size that you'd guess if you just went across it horizontally. Which, you know, would also make the game not necessarily more fun, but more acceptable. No, accessible is probably a better term. It is a good game. It's just most people are, you know, not going to have the time or the inclination to play through this thing in one bloody sitting. Which, you know, I rail against a lot because, and it's because I care. This is genuinely the seeds of a really good game. But instead, due to some baffling design choices, it's just, you know, a good game instead of being a really fucking good game. Which it could have been. And I'm kind of disappointed in that fact. Because the world needs more completely and utterly bizarre games like this. You know? Who wants to play the latest, you know, GTA when you can have a red and yellow plasticine puppet throwing his arms at people? And you don't see too many games like that. In fact, I'm pretty certain this is the only game you'll see like that. Because there's no possible way you could get a team on this many different drugs to stay coherent longer than needed to produce the design brief for a single bloody game. And yes, I have managed to wind myself down to quite literally the closest death you can come in this game without actually dying, because I'm too lazy to go back and reload for the parts where you're getting your ass handed to you, which as always is going to come back to bite me in the ass, as it typically does. I'm saying typically, it always bloody does. So now I've got to actually get back to the end, having killed all the fleas without taking even the slightest scratch of damage, because they were too stingy to put any of the goddamn health recovery berries in this level. And now the angry and sad pollen is actually starting to look like a legitimate threat. Insofar as pollen can ever actually be a threat to somebody who's not dying of hay fever, or asthma, or any other of those illnesses that make you look an awful lot like an unfit human being. I thought fleas liked dust. Not eating it, but living in it. Shows you what I know. I got a boss level coming up, I believe. And like all the boss levels in this one, it's kind of short and kind of anticlimactic. Although why he's going out of his way to pick a fight with a spider, I'm not actually certain. Because, it does seem kind of pointless. Just a bit of a different pattern. This one, this spider will duck down for a split second, so you can hit it, then bounce around the screen if you do. If you don't time it right, it flies back up at the top of the screen and nothing happens. Got to dislike that about the boss fights in this game. They're all pretty simplistic pattern recognition stuff. They're not long enough to be all that boring, but there's really not a lot in them that's interesting. It's paint by numbers bosses, which is kind of the antithesis of how the rest of this game works. So, everything else in this game is, well, all the base mechanics are kind of generic. There's a really weird twist on pretty much everything. The boss fights, on the other hand, are... platformers usually aren't renowned for good boss fights, but this is just goddamn ridiculous. Although the multicolored spinning web in the background is remarkably reminiscent of some sort of 60s flashback. So, although it needs more green. I suppose you're getting that from the bullets or something. I have no idea how a spider is spitting out bullets, and I don't really want to know. Nor why her legs are getting broken off without even hitting the legs. And when the direction of impact has no effect whatsoever on which leg gets broken off. I admit, the bullet patterns are kind of interesting. It's almost like a proto-bullet hell stuff on a really limited scale. And it's not so much about the timing as recognising the patterns beforehand and not being there. But unlike the bullet hell games, you don't just have a single bit of health, so you can afford to take a few hits. And those plant things look really disappointed in me for winning, which is kind of a pity there. But oh, it's him actually. I could have sworn that was a her. But it still makes no goddamn sense anyway. And there won't actually be an Installment 12. I completely screwed the level up, and it's a really bloody boring level, so I'm going to skip straight to the one after it. Save you having to sit through me screwing up a whole bunch of shit on a 15-minute long level.